For context, I'm recording this a little bit more spontaneously than I usually do these things, and I usually record these things quite spontaneously, so that's saying something. But in this case, I thought it would be, in order to, get more of a honest declaration of my position on this matter, it would be better to do it as spontaneously as possible, as if it were one of those hypothetical gun to the head situations, and wake up in the middle of the night, gun to your head, what do you believe about X issue? What are your actual thoughts on the matter? So I'm treating this somewhat like that, perhaps. Okay, and also for further context, to begin, I was raised within Catholicism to some amount. It was more, there was more pretense than on the basis of any kind of real religious or spiritual conviction on the part of my parents, who of course were the ones to bring me into it. I of course would have been much too young at such an, in infancy, right, to make such decisions sagely of my own accord. But yeah, so that was the case, and I went to Catholic schools until around the age of 12, 13. So it was something I was consistently exposed to, going to mass and such, kind of extensive religious education, and drinking the blood and consuming the flesh of Christ. I always found that kind of macabrely humorous, even at the time. The idea that we were engaging in this sort of ritualized cannibalistic practice. The priest you queue up for to drink from this chalice that he offers to you, and he poses you the question, like, will you drink the blood of Christ? And you say, yes, priest. And then he hands you a wafer, which is, through the transubstantiation, is literally turned into the flesh of Christ. And he says, will you take his body? And you say, yes. And then you take his body, you consume him, you take him into you. But yeah, anyhow. So I suppose for the reason of being, exposed to these ideas from a young age, to this figure and so on, of course I have a bias as to why I would be so preoccupied with this figure, why I would return to it at a later date as an adult, when I'm more autonomous and I kind of led to things by seemingly my own intuitions and my own discernment, right? And so that being the case, I have had this recurring infatuation with this Christ figure, and have as such been drawn to the Gnostic texts, principally that concern him. Gospel of Thomas is probably my favorite, containing the sayings that are attributed to the Christ, and there's some sort of debate as to whether that actually technically is Gnostic in nature, but anyhow, it's commonly just in common parlance considered to be Gnostic. But yeah, scholars on the matter actually contend that, and one can see, like in the the text is largely variations and stuff that are found within the canonical Gospels. Sort of the the greatest hits, as it were, of the Saviour. But we also see some somewhat novel sayings that are kind of quite intriguing and sort of more esoteric and almost Zen-like in nature. That's one thing that's often said about the Gnostic Christ as he is portrayed in the Gospel of Thomas. He's almost sort of like this Zen master, like in the way that he phrases these sort of, prefers these sort of paradoxical phrasings that are pointing towards this sort of ineffability and this sort of transcendent oneness, as we find in Zen. But so that being the case, saying I find a lot of utility to those sayings anyhow, irrespective of whether they were issued directly from a historical Christ figure or whether they're more would be more appropriately should be considered to be sort of like the distilled sort of confluence of Hermeticism and Neoplatonism and Judaism and other like ideas that would have been floating around Egypt and the Mediterranean at the time that these texts were composed. Whatever the case may be, I find a great deal of utility in them. And so, I somewhat vacillate, whatever, between perceiving them more like a more literal interpretation of this figure, seeing it in a more archetypical way, as being a myth, of being representational of or like an anthropomorphization of astrotheological concepts, just astrology in general. You could see there's like it's been well documented, these ideas of how Christ is simply a sort of kind of a rebranding, a repackaging of the more ancient ideas of solar gods that are born at such and such a time of year and have the same sort of life cycle of it's very clear when we look at the resurrection myth that it can be directly transferred to what we actually observe of the sun during the winter solstice. Right? It seemingly dies for 3 days. It ceases to transit across the sky. And then at the end of that period, it begins once again and it rises to its full height, its full glory, and so on. And then, but I suppose more consistently, I fall into line of seeing this figure or contextualizing it with this idea of finding and fostering the Christ within you, right? Of, in a sense, becoming Christ, of finding that small seed, that kernel, and cultivating it through this process of just intentionality, of intentionally directed awareness, and something like that. That's sort of what I most most consistently find myself interpreting it as such, and through perhaps the lens of, as I mentioned in one of the previous videos, of interpreting the seemingly paradoxical idea of Christ being both fully God and fully man. It's this sort of Advaita-like perspective of the relative and the absolute. That one can simultaneously be this contracted ego, I, and the simultaneously the totality of all perceivable reality. It's that seeming tension of irreconcilable opposites that are in fact occurring simultaneously and are equally true. But in any case, there's much merit to be found from studying this idea of this figure of Christ, of examining in depth all of these various interpretations that are on offer, right? It's it's been said commonly that with any spiritual text or any spiritual concept, it can be interpreted. There's multiple layers of interpretation. Of course, the most exoteric one is simply a literal interpretation. That's the one that the majority of people fall into the pitfall of seeing, both fundamentalist religious people and atheists alike. But there are many layers of meaning and significance to all of these scriptures and the concepts that are presented therein. And so, of course, this concept of Christ is no different. It's incredibly rich in meaning and significance, I have found. And I still feel like I've barely scratched the surface with the idea. So there's a lot more to unpack and learn and transfer to my own life to put into practice. Yeah, that's just a little bit of my sort of knee-jerk response to that question for myself. I'm sure there's much more that I would probably think of if I was to give it a greater degree of reflection and thought prior to answering, but that's just it for now. My most sort of honest, candid expression of my own thoughts at the moment. Yeah, I just realized after recording that I wanted to mention about relating to, as I discussed at the beginning, the practice of communion, taking of the blood and the flesh of Christ, the theory that relates to Amanita muscaria, or just psychoactive mushrooms in general. Just I think it's kind of interesting. And it also ties into, Christmas as well that's approaching. I'll try my best to remember all the details of this so I have to come back and, do another addendum. So yes, this hypothesis about the Christ being a mushroom, right? And this idea of the flesh and the blood. So something about Amanita muscaria is that it has to be processed in order for it to be effectively psychoactive. There are two psychoactive compounds, ibotenic acid and muscimol. I think the ibotenic acid has more of a more of a sort of stimulating, sort of antagonistic quality to it. I think it's the more toxic compound. The muscimol has more of a sort of sedative effect. It works on the GABA receptors of the brain, the same as alcohol, and like drugs like benzodiazepines. So, like, in order for it to be, beneficial to the user, the ibotenic acid has to be sort of processed out to be reduced. And as far as I understand it, you can do this by like drying the mushrooms at a certain like temperature, or boiling maybe also. But also, this is a theory that one can process it through the body of someone, right? And in Siberia, as I understand it, it's been traditionally processed through reindeers that were just naturally eating it anyway, and then they would consume the urine of the reindeer shamanically, and as such reap the benefits of the muscimol from the Amanita muscaria mushroom. And this ties into the origin of Christmas. It's one theory of the origin of Christmas relating to Siberia anyhow, of the significance of reindeers and the red and white. It's not just from Coca-Cola marketing. It ties into the Amanita muscaria mushroom, this red and white sort of classic, very charismatic mushroom. And they would place these on the sort of coniferous pine trees, and that's like, the Christmas tree decorations, and you have the presents under the tree, which is like presents. You consume this mushroom and you become present. You're more aware and alert to your surroundings, and filled with this sort of peaceful, tranquil love, right? This love-like feeling, this agape feeling. That's the church fathers, talk about in Christianity. And so there's, one theory that, as I was saying, it would also be consumed through people. So the shaman, however you want to pronounce it, would consume the mushroom, the Amanita muscaria, and so they would drink the urine of the shaman, and this would be the blood of Christ. And then also they would make these crackers from the mushroom itself, drying them through the method that I sort of briefly alluded to. And that would be the body of Christ. So, the mushroom is Christ, and I think that's reasonably well outlined. Just an interesting little thing I like to consider. So one more thing in relation to the communion, body and blood of Christ, and the shamanistic consumption of Amanita muscaria. I suggested that Christ was the mushroom. There is that hypothesis that he is or was a mushroom, right? But then also there is the theory that he could himself have been the shaman figure that facilitated this process, and was, archetypically, so there were many Christ shamans that would facilitate this process, and their body and blood was ritualistically consumed thereafter, right? And I can't recall sources say, but I have come across the idea that this was actually something that has been documented, or the speculation that such was reasonably common practice in bygone time, this idea of Godflesh, right? You may know of the musical group also called Godflesh, but that's neither here nor there. And also there was, this is probably generally considered to be propaganda, but in ancient Rome, when Christianity was first sort of just this very heterogeneous, I don't know how to pronounce that word, but there was just very diverse, sort of sporadic, sort of cults, sort of all holding similar ideas, but also very diverse ideas, variations on a theme, say, and the authorities at the time would say that these cults were engaging in cannibalistic practices in their sort of underground enclaves in the city. That Christianity was a sort of orgiastic sort of blood cult. Yeah, I think that's that covers the stuff that I forgot to mention. Right.